But basically, industrial hygienist or the concept of industrial hygiene is when you do a full hazard assessment. So if you work in a plant, that may involve doing like a job or process hazard analysis. You're highlighting all your potential problems, like specifically if you have specific chemicals at your plant, or if you're at a construction site, specific equipment you're using, etc. And then you're determining the actual exposure or probability of those hazards. That's that exposure risk assessment. And then that ties into what you can do to manage those or mitigate those potential hazards and exposures. And this is a cyclical process. You go through this multiple times. At least in plants where I've done some designs, there's always a new hazard assessment done whenever, not only like in a frequent basis, like it's just done normally. Whenever we introduce a new equipment or replace something out, there's always a full hazard analysis done just to confirm and kind of list new potential hazards and other problems. So the whole key thing to this is related to the ERAM model. You don't need to know that specifically for the exam. Just I feel like we all know like this is the steps you would follow: identify your hazards, identify your potential exposure, and determine what you can do to limit that exposure. So what exactly is industrial hygiene? So it's the art and science of identifying, evaluating, controlling environmental factors and stresses in the workplace. These stresses or these impacts can not only cause impact to your workers or coworkers, but also to the environment. Industrial hygiene involves a recognition of different health hazards associated with different work operations. And you look at what are the potential major hazards, minor hazards, so magnitudes of hazards, etc., and what you can do to control, mitigate, or even eliminate certain hazards. Also, there's also workers' comp. So workers' comp is a worker may be compensated under a worker protection program. So specifically if they're injured at a plant or on a job site, that's where that comes from. And there's actually 3 phases to your process of identifying, evaluating, controlling hazards, and they're those 3 phases. First, identify your hazards, determine the presence or possibility of workplace exposures. Evaluate, determine the exposure or probability, right, or the magnitude of exposure of those hazards, and control what you can do to mitigate those hazards. So this can involve personal protective equipment, engineering controls, administrative controls, etc. And typical projects involving industrial hygiene are if you're monitoring air quality, toxic airborne vapor concentrations, reducing those vapors through ventilation, that's the process of ventilation, selection of personal protective equipment that's suited for that specific practice. And if you're dealing with hazardous materials, having a hazardous materials plan, transport and handling outlined. Also dealing with hazardous waste, how you're going to dispose of that, where you're going to store that, etc. You want to make sure you don't store certain hazardous waste next to other waste because it could potentially be reactive if there's a spill. And there's also a monitoring of noise, heat, radiation, all the important topics that will be on your exam, and we'll go through all of that.